Now we're going to take a look at adding harmony parts to the drum grooves that you've created. What we're going to do to begin with is look at using diatonic chords. These are chords that are within the key. And we're going to start by looking at C major and A minor. These are fairly straightforward chords for us to, and keys for us to consider on the keyboard, because we're just looking at white notes and we don't have to worry about playing chords which include black notes in them. So if we have a look at this chart here, we can see all the chords that exist within C major. They're diatonic chords. We've got 7 different key notes, C, D, E, F, G, A and B, which are the root notes of each of these chords. Now you'll notice on this chart that we've got C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major and A minor, and we missed out this B diminished chord because it's a bit of a strange sounding chord, and in most kind of pop music terms they're not chords that we're going to use. Okay, so if we go back to our Garageband project, what we're going to look at here is creating 2 chord, 3 chord and 4 chord sequences. These are the most common type of sequences that you get in all sorts of pop music regardless of style. Okay, so here's a groove that we created earlier. Basic 4/4 beat, fairly lively tempo, we're on 131 beats a minute. And I've just set up a grand piano sound for us to use for the chords. So what we're going to look at to start off with is adding a 2 chord sequence. Our first chord is going to be C major, which is C, E and G, and then the next chord we're going to try is D, F and A, which is D minor. And all I'm going to do is just add a very simple part that's playing quavers to go along with this drum pattern, and then we're going to look at ways to make it a little bit more interesting. So all I'm going to do is add a bar of each chord. First chord C major, second chord D minor. Let's have a look at that. So I'm going to press R to go into record mode. First of all, I'll just check that I've got my counting on, so I know I'm going to have a 4-beat counting before the recording starts. Okay, there we are. Very straightforward sequence. I'm then going to have a look down here in my edit window, and what I'm going to do before we proceed any further is make sure that I've quantized these. This is making sure that everything's in time. So I'm going to use an 8th note quantize because I know these are 8th notes that I entered in the first place. Great. I'm also going to drag in the right hand side of this region so it snaps neatly to the 2 bar sequence that I've entered here. Okay, let's have a listen to that now. Okay, now that's absolutely fine, works fairly well, but you could argue it's a little bit dull, so what can we do to make this slightly more interesting? Very simple thing you can do is, once you've got the content in there, one of the things that I've noticed students often do is perhaps not spend as much time as you could do actually working in the edit window down here. Once you've got content in there, and experimenting with different ways to shape the material that you've already edited. For example, a common way of making very simple chord sequences a bit more interesting is to just change the place at which the chord changes. So at the moment we've got 1 chord C major which starts on bar 1, and 1 chord D minor, D, F and A, which starts on bar 2. What I'm going to do is just make this second chord start a little earlier. So I'm deleting those last 4 beats and I'm going to copy over these ones, last 2 beats rather, using this alt and drag trick. Okay, let's have a listen to that. And I think already that makes a very simple sounding chord sequence sound a little bit more interesting. Okay, let's have a listen to that. Now there's nothing stopping us just looping that and saying, okay, that's actually going to be our verse chord sequence. And let's have a listen to that. So we've got C to D minor, goes back to C. Let's just have a look at another rhythmic approach we could take then. So we're going to stick with just 2 chords, but this time we're just going to have only a couple of beats of the first chord. And what I want to do is change there to my second chord. So I'm just going to get rid of those, copy this one over. Let's see how this works. Okay, let's try looping that up and see how that works. So we've still only got a 2 chord sequence. Then you might also look at perhaps going a bit earlier back to the C chord rather than going straight back in exactly as you did here, as we entered it in the first place. So starting on the beginning of bar 1 or bar 3. So what I'm going to do is just select these notes here. I'm going to drag these down. Make sure that we've got E naturals here. Oops, that's it. Right, let's have a listen to that. Drums. Okay, great, that's working nicely. Now, okay, so let's have a look at 3 chord sequences. Now, for this sequence I've decided that I like the sound of C major, D minor, which we used before, and A minor. So those 3 chords are C, E and G, which is C major, D, F and A, which makes D minor, and A, C and E, which gives us A minor. Okay, and as with the 2 chord sequences that we looked at, I think that one of the ways you can make these chord sequences a bit more interesting is to toy with the rhythm a bit, and for chords not to start and end exactly where you would expect them to, perhaps. So let's have a listen to our groove, and we'll experiment with playing these chords in using different rhythms. Okay, so to begin with, now here I'm letting the A minor last 2 bars so that we have a 4-bar sequence. Now let's try changing the rhythm. Okay, now we're going to have a look at 4 chord sequences. We're going to start with the same chords that we used before, partly so we can develop this and show a bit of variety using similar harmonic sounds. So we're going to have C major to start with, D minor, A minor, and then we're going to add an F major chord, which is F, A and C. Okay, so we could have and that works okay, there's nothing wrong with it, but again perhaps it's just a little bit 4 square and predictable. So to break that up, I'm just going to experiment with some different rhythms here, and we're going to change the chords in slightly less predictable places. Right, now I'm going to experiment with having listened to those. I've set up a staccato string part below that, so I'm just going to try dragging exactly the region that we've created on the piano down and just see how that works with a different instrument. It's often interesting how just by changing the instrument sound itself you can really alter the feel of the track, alter the dynamics and alter the way that the harmony actually feels. So it's something really worth experimenting with as you develop your arrangements.